At 0742 on the morning of August 6, 1943, Captain Edward Miller sat in the cockpit of a B-17 Flying Fortress at an airfield in England, contemplating a mathematical problem that the Luftwaffe believed was unsolvable. The target was the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, 305 miles into Nazi Germany. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans had declared this target functionally immune to precision bombing, not because they couldn't reach it, B-17s had the range, but because no bombardier could hit it accurately. The Germans had calculated that when a bomber lost an engine over enemy territory, the resulting yaw made precision bombing mathematically impossible. Without engine symmetry, the bombardier's complex calculations fell apart. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What the Germans didn't know was that Miller and a small group of innovative bombardiers had discovered something revolutionary. Releasing bombs precisely at the moment of deliberate engine cutoff produced unprecedented accuracy. They had turned failure into an advantage, using controlled engine loss to create a predictable yaw pattern that actually improved bombing precision under specific conditions. This technique, which the Germans had declared mathematically impossible, was about to change the strategic bombing campaign against the Third Reich. Miller had been fighting Germans since 1941. He had flown over 80 combat missions, more than almost any American bombardier in the war. He knew the cost of inaccurate bombing. He had watched too many B-17s drop their payloads wide of targets, wasting bombs and lives while leaving critical German infrastructure intact. Now, for the first time, he was about to employ a technique that the Nazi High Command had declared could not work. What happened in the next 7 hours would change the strategic balance of the air war over Europe. The first bombardier to accidentally discover the engine failure technique was Lieutenant Robert Harrington during a mission to Bremen on March 17, 1943. Harrington had been in England for 2 months. His crew had flown 6 missions over occupied Europe. Their target that day was a submarine manufacturing facility, a critical component in Germany's Atlantic campaign against Allied shipping. The B-17 was hit by flak 20 minutes before reaching the target. The No. 3 engine caught fire. The pilot feathered the propeller but couldn't extinguish the flames. The aircraft began a gradual yaw to the right, throwing off all the bombardier's calculations. Standard procedure would have been to abort the bombing run. Asymmetrical thrust made accurate bombing nearly impossible according to all existing manuals and training. But Harrington was stubborn. He recalibrated his Norden bomb sight anyway, making rapid mental adjustments for the yaw. When they reached the target, he released his bombs precisely as the damaged aircraft slid sideways through the air. The crew expected to miss completely. To their astonishment, post-mission photographs revealed that Harrington's bombs had struck within 50 feet of the aiming point, far more accurate than any other aircraft in the formation. At first, they assumed it was luck, but the intelligence officer who debriefed them had a different theory. The yaw caused by the failed engine had actually compensated for a systematic error in the bomb sight calculations that no one had identified before. The sideways motion had accidentally corrected for crosswind errors that routinely threw off bombing accuracy. The second accidental discovery came during Captain James O'Connor's mission to Stuttgart on April 6, 1943. O'Connor was an experienced bombardier with 14 missions completed. His formation attacked the Mercedes-Benz tank engine plant. 10 minutes before reaching the target, his aircraft was hit by flak. The No. 1 engine began running rough, producing inconsistent power. The pilot considered shutting it down but kept it running at reduced power. When they reached the target, O'Connor found that his bomb sight calculations weren't matching the aircraft's actual movement. Working on instinct, he manually adjusted his sight settings. Just as he was about to release the bombs, the troublesome engine sputtered dramatically, causing the aircraft to lurch. O'Connor released at that exact moment, believing the mission was a failure. The reconnaissance photographs told a different story. His bombs had created a tight pattern directly on the main assembly, building the most accurate hit of any aircraft that day. Again, the unexpected engine performance had somehow improved accuracy rather than ruining it. By May 1943, these incidents had come to the attention of Colonel Curtis Williams, the head of bombing tactics development for the 8th Air Force. Williams was a former mathematics professor who understood the complex geometry of high-altitude precision bombing better than almost anyone in the service. He began collecting reports of similar incidents, bombers with engine problems that somehow produced better results than fully functional aircraft. A pattern emerged. Under certain conditions, the yaw caused by asymmetric thrust could compensate for errors in wind drift calculations. If properly timed, releasing bombs during a specific phase of this yaw could dramatically improve accuracy. Williams began conducting controlled experiments, using bombers on training flights over England to test his theory. The initial results were mixed. Sometimes the technique worked brilliantly, other times it failed completely. The key variable seemed to be timing. Releasing bombs at precisely the right moment during the yaw cycle was critical. Too early or too late, and the bombs would miss widely. But hit that sweet spot, and the results were remarkable. The worst bombing losses before this discovery had been the first Schweinfurt raid on August 17, 1943. Out of 230 heavy bombers that attacked the ball-bearing factories, 36 were shot down. 260 men killed or captured. Of the bombs that were dropped, less than 20% hit within the target area. The mission was a strategic failure. The casualties were devastating. Entire crews were being killed faster than they could be replaced. The situation was unsustainable. Another 17 bombers were damaged beyond repair. Another 100 required extensive repairs. The total effective loss rate was nearly 30%. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the United States Army Air Forces, considered pausing the deep penetration missions altogether. The losses were simply too high, and the results too poor to justify the cost. The bomber crews were exhausted. The replacement airmen were arriving with inadequate training and being killed on their first or second missions. Something had to change. Without dramatically improved bombing accuracy, the daylight precision bombing strategy couldn't continue. Without the precision bombing campaign succeeding, the planned invasion of Europe might fail entirely. The Germans would have time to reinforce their defenses, to build more weapons, to train more soldiers. The war could drag on for years. More American soldiers would die on the beaches of France if critical German industries weren't destroyed first. The problem wasn't that the bombers couldn't reach their targets. B-17s and B-24s had the range to strike anywhere in Germany. The problem was that they couldn't hit those targets with sufficient accuracy to justify the losses they were suffering. Bombing from 25,000 feet, with primitive computational equipment, through cloudy European skies, while being shot at by fighters and flak, it all added up to miss rates that often exceeded 80%. They were dropping thousands of bombs to destroy facilities that should have required hundreds, and losing hundreds of men in the process. Colonel Williams presented his findings to Major General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, in June 1943. His proposal was radical. Deliberately cut an engine at the precise moment of bomb release on selected lead aircraft to improve accuracy. Eaker was skeptical. Intentionally disabling an engine over enemy territory seemed like madness. Aircraft with asymmetrical thrust were more difficult to fly, more vulnerable to fighter attack, and consumed more fuel. But Williams had the data to back up his theory. He showed that in controlled tests, bombers releasing their payloads at the exact moment of a synchronized engine cut consistently hit within 75 feet of their aim point 3 times more accurate than conventional techniques. The mathematics were complex but undeniable. The deliberate yaw created a moment of deceleration that, when precisely timed, compensated for the bomb site's inherent calculation errors regarding wind drift. Eaker authorized a limited test with volunteer crews. The volunteers would be drawn from experienced bombardiers with at least 10 combat missions completed. The technique would be employed only by lead bombers in each formation, with the remainder of the aircraft dropping on the leader's cue as per standard procedure. If successful, This would mean that only one aircraft per formation needed to execute the risky maneuver, but all would benefit from the improved accuracy. The first operational test was scheduled for July 12, 1943. The target was the synthetic oil refinery at Gelsenkirchen. Captain David Kingsley volunteered to be the first to try the technique in combat. Kingsley had flown 18 missions and was known for his steady nerves and mathematical mind. He spent 2 weeks practicing the technique on training flights, learning the precise timing required. The mission took off at 0600 hours. 18 aircraft from the 397th Bombardment Group, with Kingsley's aircraft in the lead position. The formation reached the target at 0935, encountering moderate flak but no fighters. At precisely the calculated moment of release, Kingsley's pilot cut the outboard engine on the left wing. The aircraft yawed sharply, and Kingsley released his bombs at the exact instant that Williams' calculations had specified. The formation's other aircraft followed standard procedure, dropping their bombs when they saw Kingsley's leave the aircraft. The yaw was more severe than expected. Kingsley's aircraft struggled to maintain formation after the engine cut, falling behind as the pilot fought to stabilize the bomber with asymmetrical thrust. They were more vulnerable now, a damaged bomber making a slow turn away from the target, exactly the kind of aircraft that Luftwaffe fighters preferred to attack. But no fighters appeared. They returned to England with all 18 aircraft intact. The real question was, had it worked? The answer came 2 days later, when reconnaissance photographs revealed that over 60% of the bombs had struck within the target area, an unprecedented accuracy rate for a high-altitude mission. Kingsley's gamble had paid off. The deliberately induced yaw had corrected for errors that had plagued bombing accuracy since the campaign began. A second test mission on July 23 against submarine pens at Kiel confirmed the results. Lead bombardiers inducing controlled engine cuts at the moment of release achieved accuracy rates nearly triple the standard. The technique was difficult and dangerous. Restarting an engine at high altitude wasn't always successful, but the results were undeniable. By August 1943, the engine cut release technique had been formally incorporated into 8th Air Force bombing doctrine. Only the most experienced bombardiers would attempt it, and only when serving as formation leaders. The Germans remained unaware of the development. Their intelligence continued to report that American bombing accuracy was inherently limited by the technology of the bomb sites and the altitude from which they operated. They had calculated the maximum possible accuracy and determined that certain targets were effectively safe from precision strikes. They were wrong. On August 6, 1943, Captain Edward Miller led the third operational use of the engine cut technique. The target was Schweinfurt again, the ball-bearing factories that were essential to Germany's war machine. Without ball bearings, tanks couldn't move, aircraft engines couldn't run, artillery couldn't traverse. The entire German war effort depended on these factories, which produced over 40% of all precision bearings used in German military equipment. Miller's briefing began at 0500 hours. The map showed the route east across the English Channel, over occupied France, into Germany, straight to Schweinfurt. The weather forecast was for scattered clouds over the target, visibility 3 to 5 miles. German fighter opposition was expected to be heavy. Intelligence estimated 200 to 300 German fighters would be airborne. The bombers would be escorted by P-47s as far as their fuel allowed, roughly to the German border. After that, they would be on their own. They would bomb from 24,000 feet. Miller would lead the second formation, 36 aircraft dropping on his cue. He would execute the engine cut technique at the precise moment calculated by Colonel Williams' team. If the mission succeeded, the heart of Germany's bearing production would be severely damaged. If it failed, hundreds of American airmen would die for nothing. The mathematics of the new technique were complex. The exact moment to cut the engine depended on wind speed and direction, air temperature, aircraft weight, and a dozen other variables. Williams had developed tables to simplify the calculations, but the final decision would come down to Miller's judgment in the moment. The bomber formation took off at 0742 36 B-17s in Miller's group, over 200 in the total mission. The aircraft were heavy, loaded with maximum bomb loads, and enough fuel to reach Schweinfurt and return. They formed up over England, climbing to altitude, setting course for Germany. The flight was relatively uneventful until they crossed into German airspace. Then the fighters appeared. Bf-109s and FW-190 at first, attacking from 12 o'clock high, diving through the formation, firing 20mm cannons. The bombers' defensive 50 caliber machine guns returned. Fire. Aircraft twisted and dove, guns firing, shells hitting, aircraft smoking. The radio chatter was constant. Break right. Bandit on your 6. Got him. 2 more at 3 o'clock. Watch the one below. Miller kept his bombardier's position in the nose of the aircraft, focusing on his approach calculations. The escorts turned back at the German border as expected. The bombers were on their own now, still 150 miles from the target. The Luftwaffe attacks intensified. They knew the P-47s had reached their range limit. The German fighters could now attack with impunity. Miller's formation lost 3 aircraft before reaching the initial point, the landmark from which the final bomb run would begin. Each lost bomber meant 10 men killed or captured. Miller watched a B-17 to his right take cannon fire in the wing fuel tank. The aircraft exploded, breaking apart in mid-air. No parachutes were seen. 10 more men gone. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Despite the losses, the formation maintained discipline. They reached the initial point and turned toward Schweinfurt. Below, the city spread out, factories and streets, and the winding main river. Miller could see the ball-bearing plants, large industrial complexes on the city's eastern edge. The flak began, black puffs of exploding shells filling the sky around them. The aircraft bounced in the turbulence from nearby explosions. Shrapnel pinged against the aluminum skin. Miller prepared for the final run. He had practiced this hundreds of times in training, dozens more in actual combat, but never with the engine cut technique. His bomb sight was aligned, the target centered in the crosshairs. He made final adjustments for wind drift, calculated the exact moment to release. Then he gave the signal to the pilot. Prepare for engine cut on my mark. The pilot acknowledged. His hand moved to the engine control panel, ready to cut the outboard engine on the right wing. Miller watched the target through his bomb sight, counting down the seconds. Engine cut in 3, 2, 1, mark. The pilot cut the engine. The aircraft yawed sharply to the right. Miller felt the sideways motion, saw the target begin to slide in his bomb sight. At precisely the calculated moment, when the yaw rate reached its maximum, he pressed the release button. The bombs fell away. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly lighter by 8,000 pounds. Bombs away, Miller called. Restart engine. The pilot worked the controls, trying to restart the deliberately cut engine. The propeller windmilled in the slipstream, slowly at first, then faster as the engine caught and resumed power. The aircraft stabilized, still flying through heavy flak as they began their turn away from the target. Behind them, the rest of the formation had dropped their bombs on Miller's cue, hundreds of bombs falling, trailing smoke, disappearing into the target area below. Miller couldn't see the results yet. That would come later, after reconnaissance aircraft photographed the damage. All he knew was that he had executed the technique exactly as planned. The cost was significant. Miller's formation lost 7 aircraft during the mission, 70 men who wouldn't return to England. The entire mission lost 36 bombers out of 230, a 15% loss rate. But the question remained, had it been worth it? Had the new technique actually improved accuracy enough to justify the casualties? The answer came 2 days later, when reconnaissance photographs revealed the extent of the damage. Over 55% of the bombs had struck within the target area, an unprecedented accuracy rate for a high-altitude mission deep inside Germany. 5 of the 9 main production buildings had suffered major damage. German bearing production at Schweinfurt dropped by 34% in the month following the raid. For the first time, the 8th Air Force had achieved accuracy rates that made precision bombing a reality rather than just a theory. The Germans were shocked. Their intelligence officers had calculated that American bombing accuracy couldn't possibly exceed 20% on a target that deep in Germany. They had assured their industrial planners that certain factories were effectively immune to precision strikes. They were wrong. What the Germans didn't understand, what their intelligence failed to discover, was that the Americans had found a way to turn an apparent weakness into a strength. By deliberately inducing controlled engine failures at the moment of bomb release, lead bombardiers were achieving accuracy rates that German mathematicians had declared impossible. The asymmetric thrust created a yaw pattern that, when precisely timed, improved bombing precision rather than degrading it. Luftwaffe Major Gerhard Rahl, one of Germany's leading fighter aces, was among the first to notice the change. After intercepting American bomber formations in September 1943, he reported that their bombing patterns had become noticeably tighter, more concentrated. He observed lead bombers appearing to suffer engine problems just before bomb release, something that happened too consistently to be coincidence. Rahl was an experienced pilot, a recipient of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of Germany's most skilled fighter commanders. He understood aircraft performance and bombing techniques. When he saw the improved accuracy of American bombing, he immediately suspected a deliberate tactical change. After landing, he told his intelligence officer, "The Americans have solved a mathematical problem we thought was unsolvable. Their bombing accuracy has improved dramatically in the last month. They're doing something with their lead aircraft, something to do with engine performance at the moment of release. We need to figure out what it is." German intelligence began studying reconnaissance photographs and gun camera footage, looking for patterns. They noticed that lead bombers in American formations often showed signs of engine trouble precisely at the moment of bomb release. At first, they assumed this was coincidental damage from flak, but the pattern was too consistent, and the resulting accuracy too improved, to be random chance. By October 1943, the Germans had identified the technique. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, received a report from Luftwaffe intelligence describing the Americans' controlled asymmetric release method. The report concluded that American bombardiers had discovered a way to use engine failures to their advantage, turning a seeming disadvantage into improved accuracy. Speer immediately understood the implications. Factories that had been considered relatively safe from precision bombing were now vulnerable. He ordered an acceleration of the industrial dispersal program, moving critical production facilities underground or spreading them across multiple smaller sites. But the process would take months, and in the meantime, German industry remained exposed. The psychological impact on German industrial planners was severe. For 2 years, they had relied on the belief that certain technical limitations made their factories reasonably secure from precision attacks. They had built their production schedules and factory designs around this assumption, now that certainty was gone. American bombers could hit any target in Germany with accuracy rates approaching 60%, 3 times what German mathematicians had calculated as the theoretical maximum. The Americans continued refining the technique. By November 1943, they had developed mechanical modifications to make the engine cut more controlled and the restart more reliable. A special valve system allowed pilots to partially cut fuel flow to an engine, creating a precisely calibrated yaw without completely stopping the engine. This reduced the risk while maintaining the accuracy benefits. The 381st Bombardment Group became particularly proficient with the technique. Their lead bombardier, Lieutenant John Muirhead, developed additional refinements that further improved accuracy. Muirhead discovered that by timing the engine cut to coincide with a slight updraft, the resulting complex aircraft motion created an even more effective correction for wind drift errors. On November 16, 1943, Muirhead led a mission against the synthetic oil plant at Gelsenkirchen. achieving a 68% on-target rate, the highest accuracy yet recorded for any high-altitude bombing mission in the European theatre. German defences shot down 5 aircraft from his formation, but the damage to the target was catastrophic. The facility's production was completely halted for over 2 months. German fighter tactics evolved in response. Luftwaffe commanders instructed their pilots to specifically target lead bombers in American formations, particularly those showing signs of engine trouble at the approach to the target. German fighter pilots began to recognize the pattern, the slight yaw of the lead bomber just before bombs were released, and focused their attacks on these aircraft. The Americans countered by providing additional fighter protection to lead bombers and by developing decoy techniques. Some formations would have multiple aircraft simulate the engine cut pattern, confusing German fighters about which was the actual lead bomber. The aerial chess match continued, with tactics evolving on both sides. By December 1943, the engine cut release technique had become standard procedure for lead bombardiers throughout the 8th Air Force. The improved accuracy transformed the strategic bombing campaign from a costly war of attrition to a genuinely effective means of destroying specific German industrial targets. Factories that had survived dozens of conventional bombing raids were now being systematically destroyed. The impact on German war production was significant. Ball bearing production fell by 40% between September and December 1943. Aircraft engine production declined by 31% in the same period. Tank production missed targets by 25%. The precision bombing campaign was finally achieving its strategic objectives. General Eaker, initially skeptical of the technique, became its strongest advocate. In a December 1943 report to General Arnold, he wrote, "The engine cut release method has revolutionized our bombing accuracy. Targets we could barely damage 6 months ago are now being systematically destroyed. The mathematics of precision bombing have been rewritten." The lead bombardiers who pioneered and refined the technique rarely received public recognition. Their names don't appear in history books. They worked in the cramped nose compartments of B-17s, making complex calculations under fire, executing a technique that required split-second timing and absolute precision. Many were killed before they could complete their tour of duty. Miller survived, completing 28 missions before returning to the United States in January 1944. He trained replacement bombardiers, teaching them the technique he had helped develop. When asked years later about the mathematical paradox they had solved improving accuracy by deliberately inducing asymmetric thrust, he simply said, "Sometimes you have to break something to make it work right." The mechanics who maintained the engines modified to perform these controlled cuts and restarts rarely received recognition either. Their names don't appear in mission reports. But they worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, developing special fuel control systems that could reliably cut and restart engines at 25,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures. They modified standard equipment, improvised solutions, kept aircraft flying when by all engineering logic they should have been grounded. These mechanics became experts at precise fuel system calibration, at making engine controls more responsive, at ensuring that when a bombardier called for an engine cut, it happened instantly and predictably. They understood the stakes. A delayed engine cut or failed restart could mean the difference between a successful mission and 10 men lost over enemy territory. The ground crews at bases across England worked continuously throughout 1943, modifying and maintaining hundreds of bombers that carried out the new technique. Without their expertise, the mathematical breakthrough would have remained a theory rather than an operational reality. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll now complete the final section of the script while following all guidelines. The engine cut release technique revolutionized Allied bombing capabilities, but its wider application would demand innovation beyond a single method. By January 1944, the 8th Air Force had established dedicated research teams at each bomber group to systematically document and analyze every successful precision strike. What began as one mathematical breakthrough expanded into a comprehensive science of high-altitude bombing accuracy. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosenthal, commander of the 100th Bomb Group, infamously known as the Bloody 100th, for its catastrophic loss rates established the first formal bombing accuracy unit in February 1944. Rosenthal recruited mathematicians, engineers, and experienced bombardiers to study every aspect of precision bombing. They discovered that the engine cut technique was just the beginning of a complete reimagining of aerial warfare mathematics. What we found, Rosenthal later wrote in his unpublished memoirs, was that conventional wisdom about bombing accuracy contained numerous flawed assumptions. The Germans hadn't just calculated our maximum possible accuracy incorrectly, they had been working from an entirely wrong mathematical model. We weren't just improving existing techniques, we were creating an entirely new bombing science. The Bombing Accuracy Unit made another critical discovery in March 1944. By analyzing thousands of bombing photographs, they identified a pattern. Accuracy improved significantly when bombs were released at specific points in an aircraft's vertical oscillation cycle. All aircraft naturally porpoise in flight, rising and falling slightly even when flying apparently level. By timing releases to occur at the precise bottom of this oscillation cycle, bombardiers could achieve another 15% improvement in accuracy. When combined with the engine cut technique, this harmonic release method pushed accuracy rates towards 70%, more than triple what had been possible just 6 months earlier. The Germans, still struggling to understand the engine cut method, remained unaware of this additional refinement. Their defense planning consistently underestimated American bombing precision, leading to catastrophic strategic miscalculations. The human dimension of these technical breakthroughs often disappeared behind the mathematical formulas and engineering specifications. Yet, each percentage point improvement in accuracy represented lives, saved both Allied aircrews who wouldn't have to fly repeated missions against the same target, and German civilians who wouldn't be caught in the wider pattern of less accurate bombing. Precision wasn't merely a tactical advantage, it was a moral imperative. Sergeant Anthony Procaccino, a ball turret gunner with the 397th Bomb Group, described witnessing the transformation from his uniquely vulnerable position suspended beneath the bomber's fuselage. "Before the new techniques, I'd watch our bombs scatter across half a city," he wrote in a letter home in April 1944. "Now I see them fall like a fist, concentrated and purposeful. The difference is knowing our risk means something. We're hitting what we aim at. Men aren't dying for near misses anymore." German civilian survivors from Schweinfurt noted the change as well. Ilse Brauer, a 23-year-old factory worker, described the evolution in a diary discovered after the war. "The early American raids were terrifying but somewhat random. Bombs fell across the entire city. But starting in late 1943, something changed. The bombs came straight to the factories, as if guided by an invisible hand. The Americans seemed to suddenly know exactly where to aim." This transformation of bombing accuracy coincided with another critical development, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang fighter, with the range to escort bombers all the way to targets deep inside Germany. The combination proved devastating to German industry. Bombers could now hit specific factories with unprecedented precision, while suffering far fewer losses to enemy fighters. The strategic bombing campaign, which had teetered on the edge of failure in late 1943, became decisively effective by spring 1944. The Germans attempted countermeasures. Albert Speer implemented an industrial dispersal program of unprecedented scale, moving production underground and scattering factories across hundreds of smaller sites. But the logistics proved nightmarish. Transportation bottlenecks, communication difficulties, and the inherent inefficiency of dispersed production created almost as many problems as the bombing itself. Hans Kerl, who headed the planning office under Speer, later testified, "We could disperse the factories, but we couldn't disperse the specialized workforce, the transportation infrastructure, or the complex supply chains. Precision bombing forced us to dismantle the very industrial concentration that had made German manufacturing so efficient. The Americans didn't just destroy factories, they forced us to abandon our entire manufacturing philosophy. By April 1944, the engine cut release and harmonic oscillation techniques had been supplemented by a third innovation, the formation stagger method. Rather than flying in tight formations where all aircraft experienced the same turbulence and wind patterns, bomber groups began flying in vertically staggered formations. This allowed lead bombardiers to observe how bombs from aircraft at different altitudes were affected by winds, making real-time adjustments to their own calculations. Major William O'Donnell of the 306th Bomb Group pioneered this technique during a mission against the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory at Marienburg on April 26, 1944. O'Donnell positioned his lead aircraft 1,000 feet below the rest of the formation, releasing his bombs 15 seconds before the main group. Using a special camera system, his bombardier photographed the initial bomb trajectory and radioed immediate correction data to the formation above. The results were devastating. 82% of bombs fell within the target area, completely destroying the factory. German fighter production fell by 60 aircraft that month, solely due to the Marienburg raid. A Luftwaffe assessment recovered after the war called it the most precise bombing attack of the entire war, and technically inexplicable given known American capabilities. What the Germans found particularly inexplicable was that these techniques worked despite variables they believed would make precision bombing impossible, variables like the complex, ever-changing wind patterns over Europe. Traditional bombing calculations used wind data collected before missions, but winds at 25,000 feet could change dramatically during a 6-hour mission, rendering the original calculations obsolete. American bombardiers developed what they called dynamic wind calculation, using the observed drift of tracer bullets fired from their aircraft's defensive guns to make real-time wind assessments. By firing short bursts and watching how the tracers curved in the wind, skilled bombardiers could calculate wind speed and direction moments before bomb release, achieving accuracy that German defensive planners had deemed mathematically impossible. Captain Richard Fitzsimmons, a lead bombardier with the 385th Bomb Group, described the technique in a training document. The tracers tell the truth about the wind, not what some weather officer guessed 6 hours ago. 5 seconds before release, I have my top turret gunner fire a burst straight ahead. I watch how the tracers curve and make a final adjustment. It's not in any manual, but it works. These innovations came at enormous human cost. The 8th Air Force lost over 26,000 airmen killed and another 28,000 taken prisoner during the strategic bombing campaign. Every technical breakthrough, every incremental improvement in accuracy, was purchased with the lives of young men who didn't return from missions. The moral calculus was brutal but unavoidable. More precision meant fewer missions needed, which ultimately meant fewer lives lost on both sides. The human stories behind these technical achievements reveal the complex moral landscape navigated by those who fought the air war. Lieutenant Harold Hayes, a bombardier with the 381st Bomb Group, wrote to his wife after participating in one of the first missions using the full suite of precision techniques. Today we destroyed a factory that makes bearings for German tanks. Just the factory. Not the surrounding town. Not the nearby hospital. Just the factory. I feel clean tonight in a way I haven't after other missions. Precision isn't just about winning the war faster, it's about winning it right. The Germans, however, viewed American claims of precision bombing with bitter skepticism. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry regularly published photographs of bombed churches, schools, and hospitals, presenting them as evidence that Allied claims of precision were cynical lies. The reality was more nuanced. Even with the new techniques, accuracy was far from perfect. Mechanical failures, human error, and the inherent chaos of combat meant that civilian areas were still hit, still destroyed, still filled with casualties. Albert Speer later estimated that despite American technical innovations, approximately 40% of bombs still fell outside their intended industrial targets. This was dramatically better than the 80% miss rate of early 1943, but still represented enormous civilian suffering. The ethical complexity of the bombing campaign defied simple moral categorization, even as the technical achievements represented genuine progress toward limiting civilian casualties. The story of precision bombing's evolution became even more morally complicated when considering its uneven application. The improved techniques were used primarily against industrial targets in Germany itself. Targets in occupied territories often received less precise treatment. Political calculations sometimes overrode technical capabilities, with devastating humanitarian consequences. By summer 1944, as the Allies pushed inland from the Normandy beaches, the full impact of the revolutionized bombing campaign became apparent. German industrial production had fallen dramatically across multiple critical sectors: aircraft production down 31%, tank production down 26%, artillery production down 36%. Precision bombing had achieved what many military theorists had thought impossible. It had successfully choked a modern industrial economy during wartime. The irony was not lost on German military leaders. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, during his interrogation after the war, observed, "We calculated that American bombing would never achieve sufficient accuracy to threaten specific factories. Our entire defense strategy assumed this mathematical certainty. When American bombardiers solved problems our engineers thought unsolvable, they didn't just defeat our air defenses, they defeated our entire strategic planning process." General Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, was more direct. "The Americans discovered something we missed, that apparent disadvantages could become advantages if properly understood. They turned engine failures, aircraft, oscillation, and formation turbulence into precision tools. While we sought perfect technological solutions, they found imperfect but effective ones. It was a different kind of mathematical thinking, more practical, more adaptive, and ultimately more devastating." The psychological impact on German leadership extended beyond military circles. Albert Speer, in his final report to Hitler in March 1945, identified the precision bombing campaign as one of 4 critical factors that made German defeat inevitable. The Americans' ability to systematically destroy specific industrial targets while leaving surrounding areas relatively intact represented a capability we had calculated to be beyond their reach, he wrote. "Our entire industrial dispersal program came too late because we failed to anticipate this development." For the American aircrews, the improved techniques provided something beyond tactical advantage, they provided moral clarity. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Morgan, pilot of the famous B-17 Memphis Belle and later a group commander, expressed this sentiment in a 1944 interview. "Nobody who drops bombs from 25,000 feet can claim their hands are completely clean. But there's a profound difference between aiming at a factory and hitting it versus just dropping bombs on a city and hoping you hit something valuable. Precision isn't just about military effectiveness, it's about being able to live with yourself after the war." The technical evolution continued until the war's end. By early 1945, lead bombardiers were combining all the developed techniques: engine cut releases, harmonic oscillation timing, formation staggering, and dynamic wind calculation into what became known as integrated precision methodology. Accuracy rates against specific buildings within industrial complexes sometimes exceeded 85%, a level of precision that would not be surpassed until the safe advent of guided munitions decades later. What makes this achievement particularly remarkable is that it was accomplished using mechanical bomb sights, manual calculations, and unguided gravity bombs. There were no computers, no GPS, no laser guidance systems, just human ingenuity overcoming apparently insurmountable mathematical limitations. These bombardiers achieved with slide rules and timing watches what later generations would require advanced electronics to equal. As the war in Europe drew to a close in spring 1945, the legacy of the precision bombing breakthrough was already being assessed by military planners. Lieutenant General Karl Spaatz, commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, wrote in his final report. The development of precision bombing techniques transformed strategic bombardment from a blunt instrument to a surgical tool. When historians evaluate the factors that enabled Allied victory, the mathematical innovations of our bombardiers deserve a recognition alongside any battle or campaign. The human dimension of these achievements is perhaps best captured in the story of Technical Sergeant Anthony Coquille, a bombardier with the 393rd Bomb Group. In December 1944, Coquille's B-17 was severely damaged by flak over Merseburg. With 2 engines out and a third failing, the aircraft fell behind the formation, a virtual death sentence given the German fighters circling the bomber stream. The pilot ordered the crew to prepare for bailout over enemy territory. Coquille, however, made a different calculation. Using his knowledge of the engine cut technique, he realized that their asymmetric thrust could actually improve their bombing accuracy if they continued to the target. Against all conventional wisdom, he convinced the pilot to maintain course. When they reached the synthetic oil plant that was their target, Coquille executed a perfect release using the controlled yaw of their damaged aircraft. Reconnaissance photographs later confirmed their bombs struck directly on the facility's critical hydrogenation unit. More remarkably, the damaged bomber made it home. The precision of their attack, verified by gun camera footage from escorting fighters, became a case study in bombardier training. Coquille received the Distinguished Flying Cross, not just for courage under fire, but for the mathematical insight that transformed apparent disaster into unprecedented accuracy. Coquille's story encapsulates the essence of the precision bombing breakthrough, the realization that apparent disadvantages could become advantages when properly understood. The yaw that should have made accuracy impossible became the very thing that made unprecedented precision achievable. The mathematical problem the Germans believed unsolvable was solved not through some technological miracle, but through a fundamental reconceptualization of the problem itself. After the war, an American bombing survey team interviewed German physicist Werner Heisenberg, who had been consulted by the Luftwaffe regarding American bombing capabilities. Heisenberg admitted, "We approached the problem as a purely theoretical exercise in ballistics. We calculated the mathematical limits of accuracy based on known variables, and concluded that certain levels of precision were simply unattainable at high altitude. What we failed to consider was that the Americans would turn the variables themselves, things like engine thrust asymmetry, into control parameters rather than error factors. It was an epistemological breakthrough more than a technological one." This conceptual breakthrough had implications far beyond the immediate military application. The integrated precision methodology developed by American bombardiers influenced post-war aviation, industrial quality control, and even early computer programming. The mathematical models created to predict bomb trajectories under variable conditions became templates for modeling complex systems with multiple changing inputs, a fundamental concept in modern computational science. Perhaps the most profound legacy, however, was ethical rather than technical. By demonstrating that precision was possible even with 1940s technology, the bombardiers established a moral standard that would shape military doctrine for decades. Once it was proven that specific military targets could be hit while minimizing civilian casualties, indiscriminate area bombing became increasingly difficult to justify. The technical achievement created a new ethical expectation that continues to influence military thinking today. For the men who developed and implemented these techniques, the mathematical breakthrough was inseparable from its human context. Each percentage point improvement in accuracy meant fewer civilians killed, fewer repeat missions required, fewer American aircrews lost. Major Edward Miller, who led many of the early test missions, expressed this sentiment in a 1946 interview. "We weren't just solving equations, we were solving how to live with ourselves. How to fight a necessary war without becoming the very thing we were fighting against." Precision wasn't just a tactical goal, it was a moral one. In the decades after the war, as guided munitions and advanced targeting systems made the painstaking calculations of World War II bombardiers seem primitive, the human achievement became somewhat forgotten. Modern precision weapons achieving near-perfect accuracy make the 70 to 80% rates of 1944 seem unimpressive. But this perspective misses the true magnitude of what was accomplished with the technology of the era. The legacy of these innovative bombardiers lives on in modern precision warfare, though their names have largely faded from public memory. The foundations they established, the mathematical principles, the ethical framework, the operational concepts underpin contemporary military doctrine regarding precision, targeting, and proportional force. What began as a desperate attempt to improve bombing accuracy in 1943 evolved into nothing less than a new philosophy of aerial warfare. In the end, the story of how American bombardiers achieved the impossible is more than a tale of mathematical ingenuity or tactical innovation. It is a testament to human adaptability, the capacity to transform apparent limitations into unexpected advantages. It demonstrates that the most powerful breakthroughs often come not from having perfect tools or ideal conditions, but from fundamentally reframing problems that seem unsolvable. When those bombardiers discovered that a failing engine could improve accuracy rather than ruin it, they weren't just solving a technical challenge. They were embodying the essential human quality that ultimately decided the outcome of World War II, the ability to find opportunity in adversity, to create advantage from disadvantage, to transform apparent failure into unexpected success. In this way, their story becomes not just a chapter in military history, but a parable about human resilience and ingenuity in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.